The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly in all directions, dotted only by distant stars that offered no hope to the dying fleet drifting through the void. Captain Veltar pressed his clawed hand against the cold metal wall of his command bridge, feeling the vibrations that told him everything he needed to know. The great engines that had carried his people across the galaxy were silent, dead. Around him, his officers moved with the careful precision of warriors who knew they were fighting their last battle. But this wasn't an enemy they could shoot or stab. This was something far worse than any weapon they had ever faced. This was the slow, creeping death of mechanical failure. "Status report," Veltar commanded. Though he already knew the answer would bring no comfort, his second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Kethron, stepped forward with heavy steps. "All quantum drives are offline, Captain. The cascade failure started in the outer ring ships and spread through the entire fleet. Engineering teams report that the ancient defense grid we encountered fried every major system we have." Veltar closed his eyes for a moment. 47 ships, 200,000 souls. His people had survived wars that lasted centuries, conquered planets, and built an empire that stretched across multiple star systems. Now they were going to die not in glorious battle, but slowly suffocating in the cold darkness between worlds. The Cathari were proud warriors, each one standing nearly 8 feet tall with natural armor plating that could stop most weapons. They had been exploring this distant region of space when they stumbled upon what looked like an abandoned world. The planet's surface was covered in ancient ruins, and their curiosity had been their downfall. Hidden defense systems had activated the moment their ships entered orbit, sending out waves of energy that seemed designed specifically to cripple any technology they encountered. Now those same ships that had carried them proudly through space were becoming their tombs. Life support systems were failing one by one. The recycling systems that cleaned their air and water were shutting down. Emergency power flickered throughout the fleet, like dying candles in the wind. "How long do we have?" Veltar asked the question. Every captain dreaded. At current consumption rates, maybe 6 days before life support fails completely on the flagship. The smaller vessels have even less time, Kethron replied quietly. 6 days. In 6 days, one of the greatest fleets in Kethari history would become a floating graveyard. Veltar thought of the families aboard the civilian ships, the children, who had never seen their home world, the elders who had lived through so much only to face this end. He walked to the communications station where his operator sat hunched over failing equipment. "Send out distress signals on all frequencies. Every channel we know, every emergency band in our databases." The young operator looked up with doubt in his large eyes. "Captain, we're in the middle of nowhere. This region of space is unexplored. The chances of anyone receiving our signal are—" "I know the odds," Veltar interrupted, "but we're Kethari. We fight until the very end, even when the enemy is death itself." As the distress signals began broadcasting into the empty void, Veltar wondered if anyone would even hear their final words. 3 days had passed since the Kethari fleet began broadcasting their desperate calls for help into the endless darkness of space. Captain Jiwon sat in her small command chair aboard the human research vessel Stellar Hope, sipping her morning coffee and reviewing the day's exploration schedule. Her ship was tiny compared to military vessels, carrying only 30 crew members, on a peaceful mission to study distant star formations. The Stellar Hope wasn't built for combat or rescue operations. It was a science ship, equipped with advanced sensors and research equipment, but barely any weapons. Jiwon had been commanding research missions for 8 years, and this was supposed to be just another routine survey of an unexplored region. Her crew consisted of scientists, engineers, and researchers who had signed up to discover new worlds, not to face dangerous situations. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange on the long-range communications array," called out Minho from his position at the sensor station. He was the ship's lead engineer, a quiet man who could fix almost anything, but preferred to let his work speak for itself. Jiwon set down her coffee and moved to look over his shoulder. "What kind of strange?" "It's a repeating signal, but not from any human source. The language patterns are completely unknown, And the transmission method is unlike anything in our databases, Minho explained, adjusting his controls to clean up the signal. But there are mathematical sequences embedded in it that suggest intelligence. Dr. Huna, the ship's chief medical officer and xenobiology specialist, hurried over from her research station. She had been hoping for years to make first contact with alien life, though not under these circumstances. Can we decode any of it? Some parts, maybe. The mathematical portions seem to be coordinates and what might be technical specifications. But there's something else. Minho paused, his face growing serious. The tone and repetition pattern suggest distress. This isn't a greeting or exploration signal. Someone is calling for help. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. First contact with alien life was something humanity had dreamed about for centuries, but finding aliens in trouble created an immediate moral dilemma. Ji-won looked around at her small crew, seeing the mixture of excitement and concern on their faces. "How far away is the signal coming from?" she asked. "About 18 hours at maximum speed, assuming our navigation computers can plot a course through this region's gravitational anomalies," Minho replied. Somin, the ship's communications officer, spoke up from her station. "Captain, I should point out that we have strict orders about making contact with unknown species. Command wanted us to observe and report back, not engage directly." Ji-won nodded slowly. She knew the regulations as well as anyone. First contact. Protocols required extensive preparation, backup fleets and diplomatic teams. Her small research vessel was completely unprepared for this kind of situation. They had no weapons to defend themselves, no diplomatic experience, and no way to know if these aliens were friendly or hostile. But as she listened to the repeating distress signal, something deep in her human nature rebelled against the idea of ignoring beings in trouble. The signal sounded desperate, almost pleading. Whatever was out there needed help, and help was something humans had always been willing to give. "Plot a course," she said quietly. "We're going to take a look." The Stellar Hope dropped out of hyperspace 18 hours later, and what Captain Ji-won saw through the main view screen made her heart skip a beat. Spread across the darkness of space was the largest collection of alien ships she could have ever imagined. 47 massive vessels, each one easily 10 times the size of her small research ship, drifted powerlessly in the void like sleeping giants. "My God," whispered Dr. Hyuna from her station. "Look at the size of them." Minho was frantically working his sensor controls, his hands moving quickly across the displays. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures from those ships, but most of their systems appear to be offline. They're running on emergency power only." Ji-won felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the full scope of what they had discovered. This wasn't just first contact with alien life. This was first contact with what appeared to be a massive military fleet that was currently helpless and vulnerable. If these aliens were hostile, her tiny crew of 30 wouldn't stand a chance if their ships came back online. "Are they scanning us?" she asked. "Yes, Captain. Multiple sensor sweeps. They know we're here," Minho replied, his voice tense. Somin looked up from her communications station with wide eyes. "Captain, I'm receiving a transmission. It's the same signal we detected before, but now it's directed specifically at us. Before." Ji-won could respond. Her view screen flickered and changed. The image of the alien fleet was replaced by the face of something that made her crew gasp in surprise. The alien had features that were somewhat humanoid, but clearly different. Its skin had a grayish-blue tint with natural armor, plating around the edges of its face. Large, intelligent eyes stared directly at them, and when it spoke, the ship's computer worked frantically to translate. "Unknown vessel," the alien said, its voice deep and commanding even through the translation software. "I am Captain Veltar of the Cathari Expeditionary Fleet. Your approach has been noted. State your intentions." Ji-won took a deep breath, realizing she was about to become the first human to officially speak with an alien species. Every word she said now would become part of history. "This is Captain Ji-won of the human vessel, Stellar Hope. We received your distress signal and came to offer assistance." There was a long pause, and she could see surprise flicker across Veltar's alien features. "You came to help?" You are not here to claim salvage rights or demand our surrender. No, G1 replied firmly. We heard your call for help. That's why we're here. Another pause, longer this time. When Veltar spoke again, his tone had changed completely. The commanding military voice was replaced by something that sounded almost vulnerable. Human Captain G1, our situation is dire. We have 200,000 souls aboard these vessels, and our life support systems are failing. We have perhaps 3 days before we lose everyone. Dr. Huna leaned forward in her chair. What happened to your ships? Ancient defense systems. We encountered technology we did not understand, and it systematically disabled every major system we possess. Our engineers cannot repair the damage. We are a military fleet, not technicians. G1 looked around at her small crew of scientists and researchers. 30 humans against the technical problems of an entire alien fleet. It seemed impossible, but she could see the determination growing on every face around her. Captain Veltar, she said, we'd like permission to come aboard and see what we can do. The docking bay of the Cathari flagship was massive, easily large enough to hold 20 ships the size of the Stellar Hope. As Captain G1 and her team stepped off their shuttle, they found themselves face to face with beings that towered over them like gentle giants. The Cathari warriors stood nearly 8 feet tall, their natural armor plating gleaming under the emergency lighting, but their posture showed exhaustion and desperation rather than threat. Captain Veltar approached them with what G1 was beginning to recognize as cautious hope. I must admit, humans, when I first saw your small vessel, I wondered what assistance you could possibly provide. Our ships are beyond the technical capabilities of most species. Minho was already pulling diagnostic equipment from his pack, his engineer's mind clearly racing. Captain Veltar, could you show us to your main engineering sections? We'd like to see exactly what we're dealing with. As they walked through the corridors of the alien ship, Jiwan's team was amazed by the advanced technology surrounding them. The Cathari had materials and systems that were clearly centuries ahead of human development, but as they reached the engineering deck, the problem became immediately obvious. There's your issue, Dr. Huna said, pointing at a massive control panel that was completely dark, except for a few flickering warning lights. Your systems are too integrated. When the defense grid attacked, it created a cascade failure that took down everything at once. A young Cathari engineer named Zethra looked confused. But that is how systems should work. Everything connected. Everything coordinated. It is the most efficient design. Minho chuckled as he opened his toolkit. Efficient, sure, but not very resilient. Humans learned a long time ago that sometimes the messiest solution is the most reliable one. What happened? Next amazed the watching aliens. Instead of trying to repair the sophisticated Cathari systems, the humans began doing something that seemed completely illogical. They started disconnecting components and rerouting power through what appeared to be random pathways. What are you doing? Zethra asked, watching Minho strip wires and connect them to components that were never meant to work together. We're isolating your critical systems, Minho explained as he worked. Your life support doesn't need to talk to your weapons systems. Your artificial gravity doesn't need to coordinate with your navigation computer. We're going to make everything work independently. Dr. Huna was working on the atmospheric processes, using spare parts from their own ship, and some creative engineering that made the Cathari engineers scratch their heads in confusion. In human engineering, we have a saying, if it's stupid, but it works, it's not stupid. Somin had connected her portable computer to the alien communication systems and was rerouting power through her own equipment. Captain Veltar, we're going to get your basic systems online, but they're not going to work the way you're used to. Every system will need to be operated manually. Manual operation? Veltar looked concerned. But that requires constant attention from crew members. That's what crews are for, G1 replied with a smile. Humans have always believed that the most important component in any system is the person operating it. Within 6 hours, something that the Cathari had thought impossible began happening. Lights came on throughout the ship, air circulation, systems hummed back to life, artificial gravity stabilized. The proud alien warriors watched in amazement as 30 humans accomplished what their own engineers had declared hopeless. "How did you know this would work?" Zethra asked Minho as they watched systems coming back online. Minho grinned. "We didn't. But humans have a rule. When something's broken, you keep trying different solutions until something works." As the human, repair teams worked their way through the Cathari fleet, something unexpected began happening. The rigid barriers between the two species started crumbling in ways that surprised everyone involved. What had begun as a desperate rescue mission was turning into something much more meaningful. Zethra, the young Cathari engineer, followed Minho everywhere like a curious student. At first, she had been skeptical of the human methods that seemed to violate every principle of proper engineering. But as she watched system after system come back to life through creative improvisation, her skepticism turned to fascination. "Why do you connect the power relay through the secondary coupling?" she asked, watching Minho work on another atmospheric processor. "Our manuals say that configuration should cause a feedback loop." Minho paused in his work and smiled. "Your manuals are probably right under normal circumstances, but these aren't normal circumstances. Sometimes you have to break the rules to make things work." "But what if it fails?" "Then we try something else," Minho replied simply. "The key is not being afraid to experiment. This concept was revolutionary to the Cathari. Their entire society was built on following established procedures and maintaining order. The idea of deliberately breaking rules to solve problems went against everything they had been taught. Yet here were these small humans making their impossible repairs work through exactly that kind of thinking." Dr. Huna was having her own cultural exchange in the medical bay of one of the damaged ships. She had discovered that several Cathari crew members were suffering from what appeared to be stress-related illnesses brought on by their desperate situation. As she worked to help them, she learned about their rigid honor code. "A warrior does not show weakness," explained Commander Kethra, one of Veltar's senior officers, even as Huna treated him for exhaustion. "We endure until we cannot endure. Then we endure more." "That sounds like a good way to make yourself sick," Huna replied gently. "Humans have learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit when you need help." The commander looked puzzled. "But if a warrior cannot solve his own problems, what use is he?" "Maybe the point isn't to solve every problem alone," Huna suggested. "Maybe the point is to work together so that everyone's strengths can help cover everyone else's weaknesses." Meanwhile, Somin was making friends with the younger Cathari crew members as she worked on communication systems throughout the fleet. Unlike the older, more formal warriors, the younger aliens were curious about human culture and eager to learn. They peppered her with questions about Earth, human families, and how human societies worked. "You have no warrior caste?" asked a young Cathari named Dextar. "Then who protects your people?" "Everyone protects everyone," Somin explained. "We have soldiers and police, but we also believe that teachers protect the future, doctors protect health, and engineers protect our way of life. Everyone has a role in keeping society safe." Captain Veltar watched these interactions with growing amazement. He had commanded military forces for decades, but he had never seen his crew adapt to new ideas so quickly. The humans seemed to have a gift for bringing out qualities in his people that he hadn't known existed. The most surprising moment came when he found Zethra and Minho working together on a particularly difficult repair, with the young Cathari engineer actually suggesting creative solutions that built on human methods but incorporated Cathari technology. "Commander," she said excitedly when she saw him watching, "if we combine their improvisation techniques with our material science, we might be able to create systems that are both flexible and durable." Veltar realized he was witnessing something historic. These weren't just repairs anymore, this was the birth of something entirely new. The celebration was short-lived. Just as the last of the critical life support systems came online across the Cathari fleet, Minho looked up from his sensor readings with a face that had gone completely pale. The cheerful atmosphere in the engineering bay instantly turned cold as everyone noticed his expression. "Captain G1," he called over the communication system, his voice tight with worry. "You need to see this immediately." Within minutes, both Captain G1 and Captain Veltar were standing behind Minho at the sensor station, watching displays that showed something that made their blood run cold. 40 distinct energy signatures were approaching through hyperspace, moving in perfect formation toward their location. "What are we looking at?" G1 asked, though something in her gut already knew the answer wouldn't be good. Veltar's reaction was immediate and terrifying. The proud alien warrior actually took a step backward, his natural armor plating seeming to darken. "Devourers," he whispered, and the word carried such weight that every Cathari in hearing distance stopped what they were doing. "What are devourers?" Dr. Hyuna asked, but she could already guess from the fear in Veltar's voice that this was bad news. "Machine intelligences," Veltar explained, his military composure cracking for the first time since they had met him. "They have been hunting our fleet for 3 months across 4 star systems. We thought we had lost them when we encountered the ancient defense grid." Minho was working frantically at his controls, trying to get more detailed readings. "Captain, these aren't like any ships I've ever seen. They're enormous, but they don't match any known design patterns. And the way they're moving—" He paused, running more calculations. "They're not just following us, they're converging on this exact location." The horrible truth began to sink in as Veltar continued his explanation. The defense grid wasn't meant to destroy us. It was a trap. The Devourers built it to disable ships so they could harvest them more easily. Every ship that gets caught becomes resources for their expansion. Somin looked up from her communication station with more bad news. "Captain, I'm picking up scanning beams. They're not just approaching randomly. They know exactly where we are and what condition we're in." Juwan felt her heart sink as she realized what this meant. Her small crew hadn't just stumbled into a rescue mission. They had walked directly into a carefully laid trap that had been centuries in the making. The ancient aliens who built the defense grid had designed it specifically to feed victims to these mechanical predators. "How long do we have?" she asked. Minho checked his readings again. "Based on their current speed and approach vector, maybe 6 hours before they arrive." "Can we run?" Dr. Hyuna asked hopefully. Veltar shook his head grimly. "Not with 47 ships, many of which are still barely functional. And your small vessel, while fast, cannot carry 200,000 passengers." Captain G1 looked around at the faces surrounding her. Her crew of 30 scientists and researchers, the massive alien fleet with its proud warrior crew. All of them now facing an enemy that had been designed specifically to hunt and destroy ships exactly like theirs. "What do these Devourers want?" she asked. "Everything," Veltar replied quietly. "They consume ships, technology, and organic matter to build more of themselves. They are not interested in negotiation or surrender. They simply take everything and leave nothing behind." The weight of the situation settled over everyone like a heavy blanket. They had worked so hard to save the Cathari fleet, only to discover that their efforts had merely prepared everyone to face an even worse fate together. But as Jiwon looked at her crew and their new alien allies, she saw something that gave her hope. Humans and Cathari working side by side, sharing knowledge and building trust. Maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to face whatever was coming for them. The main conference room aboard the Cathari flagship had never hosted anything like this before. Around the massive table sat an unlikely mixture of humans and aliens, their species having known each other for less than a week, now facing impossible odds together. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, as everyone understood what 40 approaching Devourer ships meant for their survival. Captain Jiwon stood at the head of the table, looking at the tactical displays that showed their desperate situation. The Cathari fleet, even partially repaired, was no match for the mechanical intelligences bearing down on them. Her own research vessel was fast, but completely unarmed. By every logical calculation, they were all going to die in the next few hours. But humans had never been particularly good at accepting logical defeat. "I have an idea," she said quietly, and the room fell silent. "It's completely insane, probably won't work, and will require perfect coordination between people who barely know each other. But it's the only chance I can see." Captain Veltar leaned forward, his large eyes focused intently on her. "What do you propose, human captain?" Jiwon activated the holographic display in the center of the table, showing a 3-dimensional map of the approaching battle. The Devourers are machine intelligences, which means they operate on networked systems. Dr. Huna has been analyzing the sensor data, and she thinks we might be able to disrupt their coordination. Dr. Huna nodded nervously. Their ships seem to share information constantly. If we could introduce some kind of interference into their network, it might give us an advantage. But how do we get close enough to do that? Asked Commander Kethra. Their weapons will tear us apart long before we reach transmission range. We don't try to get close, Jiwon replied. We make them come to us, and when they do, we hit them with everything we've got in a coordinated strike. Minho activated his portable computer and began showing technical diagrams. The human ships are small and fast. We can outfit them with signal jammers and virus programs. While the Kethari vessels provide heavy firepower, we dart between the enemy ships, disrupting their communications. Zethra, who had become the unofficial liaison between human and Kethari engineering teams, spoke up excitedly. If we combine human electronic warfare techniques with our heavy weapons, we might actually have a chance. It would require split-second timing, Veltar said slowly. Our weapons crews would need to know exactly where your ships are at all times to avoid hitting you. Somin looked up from her communication equipment. I can establish direct links between all our ships. Real-time coordination, instant communication. But everyone will have to trust everyone else completely. The room went quiet as the implications sank in. They were talking about a battle plan. That required absolute faith between species that had met less than a week ago. Humans would be flying directly into combat zones, trusting alien gunners not to accidentally destroy them. Kethari warriors would be depending on human technology they barely understood. There's something else, Dr. Huna added quietly. Based on what we've learned about devourer behavior, they adapt quickly to new threats. Whatever we do, we'll probably only get one chance to make it work. Captain Jiwon looked around the table at the faces staring back at her. Young Zethra, eager to prove that the cooperation between their species could work. Minho already calculating technical solutions. Veltar, a proud warrior learning to trust in methods he didn't fully understand. So we make that one chance count, she said firmly. We've already done the impossible once by saving this fleet. Time to do it again. The unlikely alliance began preparing for a battle that would either save them all or destroy them together. The Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of mechanical nightmares. 40 ships, each one a perfect killing machine designed for one purpose, to consume everything in their path. Their hulls were dark metal that seemed to absorb light, and their weapons arrays glowed with an ominous red energy that promised destruction. Captain Jiwon sat in the pilot seat of her small research vessel, now hastily converted into an electronic warfare platform. Her hands were steady on the controls, but her heart was pounding as she watched the enemy ship spread into attack formation. Behind her, Minho worked frantically at his computer systems, uploading the virus programs that represented their only hope of victory. All ships, this is Captain Jiwon, she broadcast over the communication network that Somin had established. Remember, we only get one shot at this. Trust your training, trust each other, and let's show these machines what happens when they mess with the wrong species. The Kethari flagship, with Captain Veltar at the helm, took point position in the center of their formation. Around it, the other alien vessels arranged themselves in a defensive pattern that would maximize their firepower while protecting the smaller human ships. It was a formation that had never been tested before, created by two species working together. Out of pure necessity, Devourers are beginning their attack run, reported Zethra from her position aboard one of the Kethari vessels. Energy signatures are off the charts. These things are more powerful than our intelligence reports suggested. The first exchange of fire lit up space like a deadly fireworks show. Devourer energy beams lanced out with precision that spoke of perfect mechanical calculation, but the Kethari ships were ready. Their heavy armor absorbed the initial strikes, while their weapons returned fire with devastating effect. But the real battle began when Jiwon led the human ships directly into the chaos. The Stellar Hope and the other small research vessels darted between the massive combatants like insects buzzing around giants. They were so small and fast that the Devourer targeting systems had trouble tracking them, especially with Minho's electronic interference scrambling their sensors. First virus packet deployed, Minho called out as they streaked past a devourer ship. I'm seeing some disruption in their formation patterns. Dr. Huna, who had volunteered to pilot one of the other human ships despite being a doctor rather than a combat pilot, managed to get close enough to a devourer vessel to plant another virus directly into its communication array. Package delivered, she reported, her voice tight with concentration. The effect was almost immediate. The perfect coordination that had made the devourer fleet so deadly began to break down. Ships that should have been supporting each other started firing at empty space. Formation patterns became erratic and confused. It's working, Soman shouted from her communication station. Their network is fragmenting. They're losing coordination across the entire fleet. Captain Veltar seized the opportunity immediately. All Kethari vessels, concentrate fire on the lead ship. Now, while they cannot coordinate their defenses, the combined firepower of the alien fleet focused on a single devourer vessel, overwhelming its defenses and causing it to explode in fire. A brilliant flash, but the victory came at a cost. The explosion damaged 2 nearby Kethari ships and caught one of the human vessels in its blast radius. We're losing atmospheric pressure, came the voice of one of G1's crew members over the radio. Hull breach on Deck 2. The battle continued to rage around them, but something had changed. The Devourers, despite their technological superiority, were fighting as individuals now, instead of as a coordinated force. The virus programs were spreading through their network faster than they could adapt to them. G1 made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The Central Devourer command ship was still coordinating repairs to their network. If it remained operational, they would eventually overcome the human virus programs and regain their deadly coordination. This is Captain G1 to all ships, she broadcast. I'm going to ram the command vessel and upload the master virus directly into their core systems, continue the fight and get everyone home safe. Before anyone could protest, she pushed her ship's engines to maximum and aimed directly at the heart of the enemy fleet. The Stellar Hope streaked through space toward the massive Devourer command ship like a tiny arrow aimed at a giant's heart. In those final moments before impact, Captain G1 felt a strange sense of peace. She had come out here to explore the unknown, and instead she had found something far more important, the chance to save lives and build bridges between species that had never known each other existed. Upload complete, Minho reported from behind her, his voice steady despite their desperate situation. Master Virus is ready for deployment on contact. But just as collision seemed inevitable, something unexpected happened. The combined firepower of the Kethari fleet, now fighting with a coordination they had never achieved before, broke through the command ship's defenses. The massive Devourer vessel began to list to one side, its systems failing as explosions rippled across its hull. G1, pull up! Veltar's voice crackled over the communication system. We've got them. You don't have to do this. At the last possible second, G1 yanked her ship's controls hard to the right, barely avoiding the dying command vessel. As she watched, the virus programs that Minho had prepared uploaded themselves into the Devourer network through the damaged ship's communication arrays. The effect was immediate and devastating. Across the battlefield, the remaining Devourer ships began shutting down one by one. Their perfect mechanical coordination turned against them as the human virus convinced their systems to cannibalize themselves. Within minutes, the threat that had hunted the Kethari across multiple star systems was nothing more than drifting debris. The silence that followed was almost as shocking as the battle itself. After hours of weapons fire and desperate maneuvering, the sudden quiet felt strange and unreal. Slowly, reports began coming in from ships across both fleets. All Kethari vessels reporting in, came Zethra's voice over the communication network. We have casualties and damage, but all ships are intact and operational. Dr. Hayuna's voice followed, shaky but relieved. Human vessels accounted for. We lost one ship, but the crew was rescued. Everyone else is battered but alive. In the days that followed, as both fleets worked together to repair damage and tend to the wounded, something remarkable happened. The emergency cooperation that had saved them all began to grow into something deeper and more lasting. Human engineering techniques were combined with Kethari technology to create repairs that were stronger than the original systems. Cultural exchanges continued as crew members from both species shared stories, knowledge, and friendship. Captain Veltar found G1 in the observation deck of his flagship, looking out at the stars where the battle had taken place. "I have been thinking about what happens next," he said, settling his large frame into a chair beside her. "What do you mean?" G1 asked. "My people have protocols for this situation, but none of them seem adequate. How do you properly thank a species that saved your entire fleet? How do you repay a debt that cannot be measured?" G1 smiled and shook her head. "You don't repay it. You pass it forward. Someday, someone else will need help, and you'll be there for them the way we were here for you." 2 weeks later, as the Cathari fleet prepared to return home, Veltar made an announcement that would change galactic history. Standing before representatives of both species, he declared that humanity would be formally invited to join the galactic community as full equals, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. "They came to us as strangers," he said, his voice carrying across the communication networks of both fleets. "They could have passed by our distress signals. They could have decided we were too dangerous to approach. Instead, they risked everything to help people they had never met, simply because it was the right thing to do." Somin, now serving as the official liaison between the two species, stood beside him with tears in her eyes. "This is just the beginning," she whispered to G1. "The galaxy is about to discover what humans are really capable of." As the two fleets finally parted ways, heading toward their respective homes, they carried with them something precious. Proof that the universe was large enough for friendship, cooperation, and hope. The rescue mission had become first contact, and first contact had become the foundation for a future that neither species could have imagined alone.